Hello, my name's Terry Kramer, and I'm the faculty director at the Easton Technology Management Center here at UCLA Anderson. And I wanted to welcome you to this special program, Navigating Adversity to Achieve Successful Outcomes for Leaders, for Businesses, and for Society. And first, just a little bit of context on this program. First of all, it's all very likely that all of us are experiencing in one form or another one of the most difficult environments we've experienced in a long time. Whether the health and economic travesties of COVID-19, a changing work, schooling, and social environment, which has worn on for several months, and ongoing examples of racial injustices and inequities. In the midst of all of these things happening, I recently saw the announcement about Cisco's appointment of Jeetu Patel as their new incoming Senior Vice President and General Manager of Cisco's newly formed Security and Applications Business Group. Now, Jeetu I've met before, and he's been an incredible speaker at my Global Mobile Innovation class from last year. He's got an incredible set of insights about technology. He also has an amazing personal story to tell about adversity and about success. And I thought it was especially well-timed to have him here with us today. So I'm hoping you'll get the best of both topics from Jeetu, a sense of technology and where innovation is happening, and also a story about his own adversity, his own successes, and some really helpful advice. So Jeetu, first of all, let me just start out with a huge congratulations on your new role at Cisco and your incredible run at Box as the Chief Product and Strategy Officer. And let me start out with Box. You had an incredible run there. Lots of things happened there. Tell us about your tenure there. Tell us about the highlights. Tell us about your learnings.
Thank you, Terry. And by the way, before we get started, just thank you immensely for having me on the program. And I think one of my highlights was when I came over to see one of your classes last year. Was it a year ago?
It was a year ago in the spring.
Yeah, and it's just so nice to see the younger generation just full of energy and wanting to do great things. And so it actually motivates me more than anything else. So I do this more for a selfish reason than anything else, because it's great to just have a group of people that are going to be our next innovators that are going to do amazing things with their career. So thank you for having me. As it pertains to Box, how do I feel? I'd say probably, more than anything else, I feel a tremendous debt of gratitude for the company. Aaron Levy, as you know, is a very close friend of mine who's the CEO at Box. We had a great 5-year run, but I always tell him, if you think about the actual number of man hours spent, it was more like 15 years worth that we compressed into 5 years. So we had a great time growing the business from 200 million to 800 million. And I'd say that, it was a very, very difficult decision to make, because it was nothing. I wasn't looking to go somewhere else. It just so happened that a tremendous opportunity came up, and it was hard to say no to that. But I could have been at Box for the next 10 years and been fine. So, to answer your question more specifically, lessons that I've learned at Box, I would say, probably 3 come to mind that are very distinct for me. The first one is the whole notion of you just never give up. And when Box started, people discounted it and said, Microsoft is the big behemoth. You're the small little company. You're not going to be able to do it, and discounted them. And then they got to 10 million and 50 million and 100 million. And when I joined, there were about 200 million. And when I joined, it was the exact same narrative as it was when they had first started, where people were like, what are you doing joining Box? Microsoft's going to beat them. This is going to be pretty difficult. And then when they'll be close to about 750, 800 million in short order over here. And so you think of a 3x, 4x scale that can be had over here within a pretty compressed time period. And the reason for that is, this is a game, software is a game of stamina, not of speed. Like you have to make sure that you're running a marathon and it's not a 100-meter sprint. And so just keep at it and just never give up and just keep going. So that's the first lesson, is never, ever give up. Just keep going. Which I know it sounds cliche, but it's, if you look back at the people that have been wildly successful, it's been because of their persistence as much as their intellect. The second big area that I think was a great lesson to learn, and it was reinforced more at Box, but it was amplified for sure as well, which is this whole notion of the power of compounding. And you think about the power of compounding in the way it works is kind of, one of my mentors had told me, shipping is a feature. To ship software is a feature. So you can't just think about the features that you're never going to ship. You have to make sure that you continue to keep shipping. And so you keep chipping away at things. And the way this actually ends up working is you have, you keep chipping away at things every day. And every single day you add some capability. Every single week you add some capability. Every single month you add in capability to the product. And you're making the experience better for the customer. You're making sure that there's more value being created. And initially it feels like, I'm not really making that much progress. I'm just going out and doing small little things. And then a week goes by, and a month goes by, and a quarter goes by, and a year goes by, and a couple of years go by. And then you look back and you say, where did we start and where are we today? And it's actually amazing on how those small little capabilities that you kept adding amount to an entirely different experience in a year or two. And that's because you kept chipping away at it every kind of, every day, every week, every hour, and you just keep going at it. And so what I would say is this whole notion of the power of compounding is it is extremely important to make sure that you keep building on top of things and don't go out and try to boil the ocean at once, but just keep incrementally building away with a large enough vision. And then before you know it, you've actually gone out and made a huge difference. So that, in my mind, is a second big lesson to learn over there, is there's a tremendous power of compounding in life in general, in everything you do, but definitely in software. The third one that I would say that I learned from Box, which was a fantastic lesson, is this notion of you have to find the mega trends in the market, and you have to make sure that you don't fight them, but use them as a tailwind. And it's very hard to beat a trend that the entire world is going in a path of, especially as it's a new thing that's coming about. But if you actually use that as a tailwind, you do a tremendous job in making sure that your business propels forward. We had a few of those opportunities at Box. We had an opportunity with the cloud, then we had an opportunity with mobile, and then we had an opportunity with AI. And each one of these were meaningful kind of trends that actually propelled us forward. And, and right now what's happening is all three of them compounded together create a fair amount of kind of momentum for the company. So those would be the three I would say: is never give up, power of compounding, and, make sure that you find the tailwind in the business.
And let me tag on to your question before we get on to Cisco about scale in technology. Because Box is big, but it's not gigantic by any means. We just had Tom Wheeler speak a couple weeks ago, the former FCC chair. And also he's been the head of a bunch of industry associations, has a very good purview on technology. He very much believes there's getting to be too much dominance and scale of the big tech players, whether they be players like Google or Facebook or Amazon, et cetera. There's more and more kind of question now that there's more and more movement to scale with COVID-19, that smaller companies are capital constrained, and it's really the bigger players that are getting more advantage. What is your view on technology-based adoption with smaller companies? Is it actually getting more difficult, and you'd advise people be careful on that, or no, if you get the right strategy, you can be just as fine?
Well, I think that there's a two-part change that's occurring right now. The bigger companies are for sure getting smarter about disruptive forces that have historically kind of defined how the industry, when you move from an era to an era, when you move from mainframe to client server computing, the people that dominated the profit pool in the mainframe era weren't the ones that ended up dominating the profit pool in client server. When you move from client server to cloud, the people that dominated client server aren't the ones that actually dominated the cloud. However, the bigger companies are getting smarter in figuring out ways to operate like a startup at scale. And so that is undeniably the trend. Like if you look at companies like Amazon or Facebook or Google or Microsoft or any of these, like these are not like companies that are getting stale and not innovating. They're moving at a pretty fast pace, and so you have to know that that's actually for sure a fact. On the other hand, there's never been more startups that have actually gotten to 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, 50 million users, 100 million users, 200 million users, 500 million users than right now. Like it's the one time where you've actually seen a tremendous amount of momentum from new companies, new entrants coming in that have actually taken the market by storm. If you just look at some of the big SaaS players in the market today and enterprise SaaS, software as a service, most of those companies that are dominating today weren't even around 10, 12 years ago, right? And so it's, yes, the big companies are getting better, but so are the small companies. And when it comes to your question of capital intensity, how much capital do you have to go out and invest in this? The good news is because of the way that the microservices architecture is moved about, and because of the way that you have the cloud and RESTful services, you don't need the level of capital you did back in the 90s and the 2000s today to go out and get a really, really good product and a company built in the market today. So it takes much less money to get your product past concept stage and past a product market fit. And once you get to product market fit and you've identified a repeatable selling motion, that's when you need to pump most of the money in to get to scale. And by that point in time, the business has been largely de-risked.
And creates the growth. Yep.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Let me shift now to Cisco. Anxious to hear about your new role, and correct me if you'd like to. Cisco is a legacy technology company. We're going to think at a macro level, huge growth in 1990s, 2000s, and then going through a very interesting transformation now into newer areas. Tell us about your role. It's a brand new role, and your view on the opportunities at Cisco broadly.
Yeah, I mean, Cisco has definitely been around for a while, but they actually have a fairly large SaaS cloud portfolio, right? And some of these are brand new companies. Some of these are companies that have been around for a while, but they've actually fully been in the cloud. So if you think about brands like WebEx, you think about brands like AppDynamics, you think about Duo, you think about OpenDNS, these are all kind of meaningful brands that are out there that happen to be in the Cisco portfolio, and there's billions of dollars of revenue coming in from the modern business model of software, right? And so from that perspective, I'd say that there's a fair amount of momentum. It is already operating at scale, and there's a fair amount of kind of number of customers that are using them in the at very large scale with the number of users and number of customers. It's in the thousands and millions of users and thousands of customers, so on and so forth. And I haven't even actually gotten into the details of the number of customers yet because I haven't started with them, and I have to wait until all the NDAs are processed and I officially get on there. But you've got a fair amount of kind of momentum in the business. Where I think they have a tremendous opportunity is if you look at what's happening right now with things like secure remote work. One is people need to make sure that they have a stable and reliable and secure network and connectivity. And two is they need to make sure that they've got the right kind of applications and tools to secure the data, as well as to make sure that they can help people be more productive and collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you've got that infrastructure in place, you need to make sure that you as an IT professional are also monitoring all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the way I think about this is pretty simple. There's about 4 to 8% of an income statement of a company of most companies that gets spent on travel, and another 4 to 8% that's spent on real estate. And those spend categories are going to get completely reimagined as you move forward. And then if you start thinking about hundreds of millions of dollars that will also be spent on things like events that take place, and physical events, which will now become virtual, like the one that you and I are doing right now. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be a handful of players in the market, and I think Cisco is one of those players with very good technology, a very strong distribution channel, a large scale, and a large kind of trusted group of customers that really trust Cisco to say, hey, you can take care of my my intellectual property, and you can take care of my employees in the right way. And so I feel like there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to turn a ship like this into a much more of a SaaS-based and software-based offering. Mm-hmm. And that's the transformation that Chuck Robbins has been leading within the organization. And that was what they said that they wanted to kind of double down on. And so when you think about that, it's like, wow, that's a great opportunity to take, globally, there's 3 billion knowledge workers and field workers in the world. And if you take that and say, I'm going to change the way that they work, there's probably not too many contributors to global GDP than just going out and making that happen.
Yeah.
So from a mission perspective, it seems like a pretty large mission to go out and solve for. Like you could leave a mark for yourself and for humanity if you do it right.
So on a practical level, your responsibilities will include WebEx, Duo, Jasper. Say just a little more practical.
Yeah.
What you're going to be.
Yeah. So all of the collaboration businesses that they have, all of the security businesses, and all of the application performance management business like AppDynamics, all of those would be under my purview.
Wow. Great role. Congratulations.
Yeah. It'll be fun. It'll be, and by the way, the thing is when I say there's very, very capable leaders for each one of those businesses. And you've got, close to 10,000 employees in all of those businesses. And there's a fair amount of kind of size and scale that's already there. And what we have to do is just make sure that we're growing that, because that's the fastest growth engine that Cisco has right now. And so if you can continue to keep the growth engine going, you can actually start to see some meaningful, accretion to market cap, and actually more to customer value. Right now, one of the things that's most important is customers need places where they feel they're completely secure, reliable. They can trust those companies with their intellectual property. They can trust those companies with making sure that they can make their users productive. And I think Cisco has all of those aspects in spades. And they've actually been investing in the cloud now for the past 10 years.
Yeah, a bit of your point about compounding, the benefits of compounding now.
It just chips away, and before you know it, you've got this kind of multi-billion-dollar business that's running for them.
Excellent. Let me shift over now, Jeetu, to some of the kind of current context issues. First of all, COVID-19. And, COVID and the number of people that have been affected, the number of racial injustices that have occurred, and the awareness about need for change. Say a bit about how these have affected you, either personally, professionally, both.
I think personally, and I don't know if you felt this way at all, Terry, but I definitely feel this way. My personal level of ignorance about some of the issues that some of the communities, like the Black community, faced was actually, to me, the most upsetting for myself. Like I was just so ignorant about so many areas. And then you start kind of researching, and you see, if your class hasn't seen the movie 13th on Netflix.
I just saw it. It's great.
It's unbelievable. And it's one of those things which just gives you an appreciation for the fact that, the level of inequality that exists and the injustice that exists right now, it's just not human. It's just not the way that things should be. And if we let this time go by and not change things on our clock,
Mhm.
I mean, shame on all of us during our lifetime that when history books look back at this, they say these people, something like George Floyd happened and nothing changed after that.
Mhm.
I don't know if you saw the full video or not, but the first couple of times I told myself, it's too disturbing to see, so I'm not going to watch it. Then I watched the first couple of minutes, and then one day I said I'm going to see the full thing, and I saw the full 8 minutes of it. And the true atrocity of it does not actually come about until minute 5.
Yeah.
At that point in time, he has lost consciousness, and for 3 more minutes, nothing happens.
Yeah.
It's just not right.
Yeah. Well, and the expression on the police officer's face was just, there was
no remorse. It's like,
yeah.
And we can't let that be something that on our clock becomes a repeated instance that keeps happening over and over again. Like, that's something that we have to stop. And anything that we can, being silent is being complicit. So like, you have to speak up on this issue, and you have to make sure that if you witness someone else mistreating someone else because of their race, creed, color, sex, that you actually, are there to prevent the people that are actually being being imposed upon in the wrong way. It's just the right thing to do. So so from a personal standpoint, that's how it's affected me. I think the way to what this does, though, is it brings. There's no kind of two sides to the story. There's a right and a wrong. The right is you're not going to be racist, and wrong is you're going to be racist. And it's that simple, And so on this side, it's pretty easy to side with the right side and say we're all going to just galvanize and come together. And I think if you look at the movements that have happened in the past, few weeks, it's encouraging to see that there is actually momentum and that people haven't let that die down yet. And I hope that they don't. And I hope we all actually continue to keep putting pressure on the system to say it's just not okay. And that, when there's good work that's being done, but we shouldn't blanket kind of, say that everything that's happening with law enforcement is bad. But when bad things do happen, you have to make sure that you actually put a stop to that and call an audible. And it's, so that in my mind, like, there's at the very intrinsic level, one of the things that we've started doing is I have a 9-year-old daughter, and we very openly now are talking to her about all of these things, because it's important that she grows up knowing, one, that no one should actually have those atrocities happen to her, and that she should make sure that she never stands for anyone else doing it to someone else, and her not actually participating and saying that I need to stop it.
Yeah. That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Let me ask the same question on COVID-19. The impact it's had on you as an individual, as a leader? Yeah,
I feel like humans are by nature social creatures, and we get a lot of our energy from each other. And while some of us are more introverted, some of us are more extroverted, the reality is that humans generally get the energy from each other. And so when this is a sobering time for humanity, in that, overnight, lives changed for the entire world, and there was nowhere to hide. And, it's kind of like one of the things you say, when nature comes after you, it doesn't discriminate, whether you're rich or you're poor, or you're black or white, you're male or female, all of us are at risk. However, the thing that's really, really sad is that the people that are suffering the most are the communities that are not as affluent. I always tell, my family, we get stir crazy sometimes. You're sitting at home and you're like, okay, I need to get out and I can't do this, and this is too long. And I keep telling them, I'm like, it is a privilege to have the ability to shelter in place, because there's billions of people in the world that actually don't have that luxury. And, the fact that we actually have that luxury to shelter in place, we should be making sure that we, one, respect that privilege and do it so that we can actually keep others safe. And number two is ensure that we can actually do everything on our end for those people that don't have the privilege to do everything that we can actually do to ensure that they have the easiest time possible with our money, with our time, whatever we can do to help out.
Yeah.
But it is I think it's a tough time in humanity. I have an 82-year-old mother, and so it's particularly hard because if I get infected, there's no one to literally take care of her because I take care of her. And what do you end up doing there? And I think these kind of issues that we've seen have been there with every single individual. Like we had recently at Box, when I was there, we just all got together in the product team and everyone just talked about it's okay when it gets hard and it's okay when it gets overwhelming. And we just talked about how difficult it was for making sure that we were having a hard time getting through the day, and just being vulnerable with each other actually does help as you move forward. So,
yeah. And Jeetu, on the topic, obviously you and I are both in technology, and I always think in these difficult circumstances, what can we do as technology leaders to be helpful? Your view on technology, how much has technology actually been part of the problem? That it's created, income divide, that has created digital divide or vice versa, et cetera. How much do you believe technology has actually helped? That, we can do a Zoom session and not have the as much distance. With the George Floyd issue, you had the benefit of smartphones and you could actually have transparency of some of the injustices occurring, et cetera, et cetera. What is your view about technology? Is it a net good, a net evil? And what do you do going forward with technology?
So I'm a little biased on this front. I believe that technology is definitely a net positive, for society. And just imagine if we didn't have technology and we had to go through the COVID crisis, it'd be a whole lot harder. The economy would have completely collapsed. And if the economy collapsed, people have a very hard time, and lives are put at risk. People don't have enough food to put on the table, so on and so forth. We are just very privileged right now. So I think technology has categorically been a net positive. Mm-hmm. I do, however, feel that the technology industry has a far greater responsibility of making sure that because we've been such benefactors of the wealth that got created from technology, that we have a tremendous amount of responsibility to give back. And I always talk about, I've talked about this for a while, where when you think about disruption, I think Silicon Valley and technology has had an overly simplistic view on that, which is, disruption is good because the jobs that get lost on one side actually get created someplace else. Except that there's a lot of human damage that gets created with disruption, and that when there's a steel mill worker that loses their job, they don't become an AI programmer. And if you're someone in your mid to late 40s and you lose your job, and then that's your last decade, which might have been otherwise theoretically your highest earning decade, where you were going to go out and make enough money to stash away so you can actually retire, it could be very kind of scary for you and your family when that happens. And so I think it is our responsibility to make sure that as a technology community, we are taking full accountability and responsibility for saying, how do we retrain the workforce and move them into doing things that are actually going to be more value generating for the next kind of phase, and not let them just go figure it out by themselves. So that's one. The second area that I think is inevitable is technology will get regulated. And I think it should get regulated because there's concentration of kind of, the thing that's happening with technology companies is there's few companies that control a lot of the eyeballs. And when you do have that, you need to make sure that there's a level of regulation that happens over there so that you can ensure that it's happening with all kind of good reasons on that front. And so the first one is, making sure that we have a social responsibility of getting the workforce to be adjusting to the disruptions that are happening and to continue to keep getting reskilled. And the second one is making sure that there's enough regulation in place. And number three is, if we can all just think about continuous innovation as a way of life, but be something that can actually get, embedded into much larger group than just the technology. Like eventually every company is going to be a tech company. So I don't think you can escape technology. All you can do with technology is make sure that that's actually completely taking over a pretty large, there's a contributory effect on the constant innovation that people need to make sure that larger part of society is actually participating in, and not just a small group of people that are actually getting themselves to be the elite individuals. And I think right now we are all very privileged with a very small community of people that get a disproportionate amount of benefit. I think that has to actually get much more broadly applicable.
Yep, makes sense. Jeetu, let me now get into maybe the most sensitive part of the discussion, and I always remember it from the time you spoke in my class, and it's about your own personal story, which to the degree which you're willing to share it. And let me give you some context on this, on the question here.
Yeah.
If you look within the UCLA community and just say, what's going on with our community? I wanted to kind of laundry list a few of the challenges that the community is going through right now. So number one, we have current students that are just about to graduate or have just graduated that are entering a fairly difficult job market. So getting a role is difficult. The ones that do get roles are often starting in an odd context. They're virtual. So to your point earlier, we're kind of social creatures. They're not having that opportunity to engage with one another. You have alumni out of UCLA several years out that now are leading larger groups that are having to lead in an environment that is not a great one. Whether you say it's not great economically because businesses, many of them are in decline of some form, or there's obviously concerns about racial injustices, there's issues of COVID-19, just the broader landscape of leading is not as easy as it used to be. How do you think about adversity, your own story? What advice would you have? How do you navigate through all of this, knowing that these are difficult times? You've said it yourself, these are sobering times for society.
And I think the thing that you're referring to, so I had probably briefly mentioned a story about my childhood I don't know if I had or not, Terry, when I'd come over to your thing last time, but I'm pretty open about it. So I'm happy to share it over here for a second, just so people get context on it. But growing up, my dad was a high stakes con man. He was like a Bernie Madoff of India. And he would swindle people for money, from the poorest of farmers to the richest of corporations. And it was just one of those things which was just not a great thing to be part of. And so I left saying, I don't want to be part of that. And I just left India. And I kept my mother in an undisclosed location because he was pretty abusive with my mother. And I'm like, I don't want to make sure that she goes through that. So we kept her in an undisclosed location. And I didn't see my mother for 7 years because of visa issues where she couldn't get a visa to come here. And I came here to go out and be in school. And then when I was in school, I actually joined a company as a student intern. And I met some great angels along the way who said, hey, I asked them for some money, to borrow some money to buy the business out. And then I ran that business for 17 years. And before you knew it, one thing led to the other. But there was a lot of adversity in how I actually, in my younger years, I had a pretty difficult time in just making sure that I went from an extreme life of wealth that was actually accumulated in the wrong way that I didn't know about, to extreme poverty with my mother not being around, and then figuring out what I had to do to go out and make sure that I got through school, take care of my mom, and then figure out in a new country how I'm going to go out and get myself all acclimated, which I came here when I was 19. And I have to say that, there was the biggest boon that happened in my life was the fact that I went through that in my earlier years. And it only makes sense when you look back at it right now, because at the time it sucked going through it. I just wanted to have a normal mom and dad, and I wanted to have someone where I didn't have to worry about being kidnapped all the time. And I didn't have to worry about, an abusive relationship, any of that. I just wanted to have a good, normal childhood. But now, after I went through that, I came here and I actually, started seeing that if you put your mind to anything, you can actually make sure that you master it. And then once you give it enough time, it becomes a great kind of vehicle for not just success, but being able to give back to the community and making sure that people get inspired by your story and so on and so forth. It just became this kind of real, blessing that I'd never thought would have been one when I was actually going through it in the first place. So the first kind of lesson I'd have for you folks is, for the people that are listening, is if you're going through a hard time right now, just know that it's okay and you will get through it as long as you keep your mind strong. So do not give up. And don't ever give up, and make sure that you keep chipping away. So the same lessons I told you about my lessons at Box, never give up. There's a power of compounding. If you keep chipping away little by little and extending your skills and working hard and don't take shortcuts and make sure that you're actually working with people and through people and doing right by people at all points in time, eventually good things start happening to you in ways that are very, very unpredictable. I had never thought in my entire life that a Fortune 50 or 65, CEO would call me and say, you have to come and work for me because we need you to run a multi-billion-dollar business. If you would have, my goal when I first came here was, I had told my uncle, who was putting me up for a while when I first came to America, I said, if I eventually in my life make $40,000 a year, and if I get to be someone who worked at Motorola, because that was a big company at the time in 91, I think I'm going to be the happiest man. I'm not going to need anything else. So just make sure that you, if you're going through a hard time, find enough of a support system so you don't actually let yourself get too down. Because in business specifically, and especially if you go into startups, the hardest thing, as Ben Horowitz talks about, is managing your own psychology. Can you manage your own psychology when things are not going right, that you can actually continue to say that I'm going to stay in the game and I'm not going to throw in the towel? If you avoid throwing in the towel at that point in time, you're better than 95% of humanity, because most people will throw in the towel prematurely.
Yeah.
And if you just got staying power, that actually it gives you a leg up that most people don't have.
So can I ask, how did you do that though? Because you had a whole bunch of bad things happen, shit happened, excuse the language.
Yeah.
And most people would say, I don't have any data points to suggest that I'm going to be successful. I don't see things getting better in the future. What was the support network or psychology went on that it allowed you to look past all that and say, I got to keep plugging along here?
There were some very distinct events that happened in my life that actually made me get very motivated. So there was a distinct moment where I had, I had taken a class, and my family, I was never a good student growing up in India. And when I came here, my reputation was, Jeetu is not really that great a student. And that was constantly reinforced in different forums that my family would have and all of that. They would say, Jeetu's not a great student, but he'll be fine, but he's not a great student. And then what I had this one class on computer programming, and it was a basic class. That was one of my first college classes. And I did pretty well in that class, and I got an A. And then I got an A also in English, and I also got an A in math, and I got the straight A's in that semester. And everyone looked at me going, oh, wow, Jeetu got straight A's. And then I thought to myself, I'm like, if I put my mind to something, anything, all of a sudden what you realize is you can conquer anything. And that's a switch that goes off in your brain that I was lucky enough that it went off for me when I was 19. For some people, they never have that switch go off. And as a result, they constantly keep kind of questioning whether or not they're good enough for doing something. All of us have a little bit of imposter syndrome, right? But it's when you can say, I'm going to make sure that if I work hard, if I don't take shortcuts, and if I put my brain behind this, if I put my effort behind this, I'm probably going to be able to go out and do the things like the best of them. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, your confidence in yourself doesn't go away and doesn't erode. Mm-hmm. And you learn that betting on yourself is probably the easiest bet you can make of anything else.
Mhm.
And so when I go to a job like Cisco, for example, and people say, "Oh, why are you going to Cisco? And what can you do at Cisco? And why not go to some other company? Or why, what specifically makes you so confident?" It's actually pretty easy. The thing that makes me very confident is myself. Because if I can bet on myself, and if they give me enough room so that I can bet on myself, I know that I'll be able to bring people along. And you just have to make sure that you know it. And you can't fake that. You have to know it. But there are times when you'll always question it. And when you question it, you have to make sure that you have a support system of friends and loved ones around you and family around you who don't put you down, but that bring you up. So I have a person, she is my ops person, Jessie.
Mm.
And every job that I go to, two of us sign up together. I never take a job without her. And any single time when I'm starting to falter, she will call an audible. She'll tell me this is where you're screwing up. And she will actually remind me of the things that I'm capable of doing at my best and what I don't do well when I'm not at my best. And it's really important to have those checks and balances with your, loved ones. My mother is another one, and my better half, my daughter will actually completely make sure that she won't let me get too big of an ego, because she'll actually keep me grounded. So I think it's important to stay confident, but staying grounded. There's a movie star in India who actually has this great line that he says, which is, "Don't let success get to your head, and don't let failure get to your heart."
Interesting. Good advice.
Yeah.
Good advice.
So I feel like that's the in my mind, like if you just keep persistent and get a support system around you, most humans want the same thing. Most humans actually enjoy sharing and giving love to people and making sure that they can actually enjoy when other people succeed. And so you just have to surround yourself with people that actually are vested in your success for no other reason besides they want you to succeed.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Let me start taking some questions from the audience here. Deborah Liu, actually one of my very talented former students, asked, what is the role of companies in addressing racial inequities that exist in the communities? What's the role of leaders in all of this?
I think it's a pretty big role. One is if you stay quiet, you are definitively complicit. And so do not stay, as companies, you cannot stay quiet about this. You have to be outspoken. Mm-hmm. And you have to take a side. You can't always try to please everyone. In the way that I take it, there's a right and a wrong, and you have to know what your moral compass is, and you have to make sure that the right side is taken. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's going to be capital that's going to be put in the way that in which you go out and promote diversity and inclusion internally within your company, how you think about hiring practices, how you think about retention and development practices within employee bases. Those are all pretty important. And one of the things that really attracted me to Cisco, and one of the things that attracted me to Box, was both Aaron and Chuck are very, very committed to making sure that they do right by the community. In fact, Cisco's mission statement itself is build an inclusive future for all. And so when you start thinking about all of that, it's I think like companies will have a pretty large role to play, especially because companies today are far, far larger with far greater amount of capital than what companies had even 25 years ago. Like the top 4 tech companies today are all worth greater than $1 trillion in market cap.
Yep.
And so you can't say that I'm going to be worth more than $1 trillion in market cap, a couple $100 billion in market cap like we are, or even $5 billion or $10 billion or whatever the number is, and say that you're not going to actually take a very active role in participating and making sure that there's an inclusive society, that people are given an equal opportunity, that you've actually done everything you can to remove unconscious bias from the way that you operate. And by the way, all of us have it. Mm-hmm. All of us have the unconscious bias. All of us feel like there's this great aspect that when people say there's this debate right now that sometimes goes on between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, and I think it's a very kind of silly debate, because Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that all lives don't matter. It just means that when there's hardship that people have when they're not Black, the skin of their color is not what actually caused them the hardship, whereas it did in the case when they were Black. And that's just unfair. Yep. And when you have that privilege, you should make sure that you actually are at least aware of that privilege, and you do everything you can to make sure that you actually give the others an even playing field. I do feel companies have a pretty big role to play. I think Cisco plays a pretty hefty role in this from what they're doing with the community, and from both a dollar standpoint as well as commitment that they make of the time and the people and the volunteers. And I think Box did the same, and I think we will. Any company that doesn't do it, frankly, shame on them for not doing it. Because I think the role of a company is no longer just to go out and maximize profit. It is to make sure that they're actually giving back to society in a way that society gets to be better.
Yep. Let me ask you, there are a couple other leadership-oriented questions here. One is, how will you build the credibility and relationships at Cisco to have frank conversations such as those at Box regarding COVID-19? How long do you think that will take to do?
I don't think those take that long, because I always fundamentally believe if you're just really authentic and don't just say what's politically correct, but say things because you feel that they're right and they actually, your moral compass and value system is what you actually align to. I don't really think about how long is it going to take me to go out and get to have those conversations. In fact, the first meeting I took at Cisco, it was a group meeting. Like I haven't officially started, but a few of my direct reports said, "Hey, can you come and join some of the meetings?" The first meeting I took was, there was a leader that we have, Linda Tong, and she was creating she had created a virtual film viewing session with Netflix for watching the 13th, and then they were going to talk about it. And that was the first meeting I attended, and people just talked about how they felt, in witnessing what was going on within America.
Yep.
Having those kind of frank conversations, I don't think it's actually hard to have them when you actually just bring people in and just have the dialogue and make sure that that dialogue is continuing to be had. So I actually don't anticipate that as being the headwind at all. In fact, I feel like there's people that are hungry to have that dialogue, and you just have to make sure that you create the right forums for those dialogues to continue to be had on a regular basis.
Yep. Related question to that, and kind of an add-on to it, what are the effective measures to take in order to talk about race with your colleagues, and how can rising leaders, especially Black and people of color, handle those situations?
The measures to take, I'd say, are, firstly, I think the first measure is making sure that the issues that the Black community faces are faced because every other community other than the Black community is not intrinsically aware of the challenges that the Black community goes through. And as a result, they need to be educated, myself included. I was not a great student of history when I was growing up, and especially American history, and I didn't even know some of the nuanced details. And the more I'm learning about it, the more I find that how ignorant I am about some of these pieces, where I felt like, if you feel like racism happened during the times of slavery and now it's not happening, you're just wrong, because it happens on a daily basis. And there was this great line that I think Will Smith had, which is, nothing has changed. It just so happened that we're now filming it on the iPhone. That's the only thing that changed. Everything else has been happening now for a while. Yeah. We just all got more aware of it because there was something that egregious that was actually filmed and syndicated through the social media channels. So the first step, I would say, is making sure that you encourage the dialogue and encouraging people getting educated. Number two is, I think, in order for moving people's perspective, you have to be able to have the ability to explain to them what the challenges are that are being faced so that they can put themselves as much as possible. I don't know what it feels like to be Black, people are like, oh yeah, you're Indians. In some cases, like for me at least, I've had a tremendous amount of privilege, and so I don't know what it feels like to be black. I don't know what it feels like to be pulled over just because of the skin of your color, and being asked questions that are very humiliating. And it's just not right. And so that's the piece that I think we have to make sure that there's a level of education that's happening in a very, very real way with the entirety of the community, not just black. The problem that the black community faces is not going to be able to be solved unless the entirety of the community goes out and participates in solving the problem.
Yep.
That's what we need to make sure that we do. And I frankly feel like having the dialogue, making sure that people get educated on it, making sure that people are openly talking about it, and educating each other and discussing openly how they feel about certain things is very important as you go through this process. And I think the forums that need to be afforded for the black community right now so that they can talk about how they feel so all of us get sensitized to it is extremely important as well.
Makes sense. A lot of good sense. Let me ask you a couple of technology-related questions, and then I want to do a wrap-up in a couple of minutes here.
Yeah. Is this useful to go through? I mean, for the team, okay.
This is
hard to tell with.
Yeah, and it couldn't be more timely. You touched on several of these, by the way, a year ago, and they're more relevant even more now than they were a year ago. So it's been super helpful. The technology questions, they have to do more on this issue about scale and technology. Is there going to be more and more of a trend of large tech companies to buy smaller innovators that create more scale? Matter of fact, Cisco is probably a living example of being very acquisitive in nature. And related to that somewhere is, where should regulation occur of technology companies?
I think it's when technology companies, here's what I think is extremely important, and I'll think of it from multiple different perspectives. Depends on which perspective you're asking the question from. There will be large companies that will continue to be acquisitive, and large companies being acquisitive is not just good for large companies, it's actually good for startups and for investors and entrepreneurs who actually have a vehicle for exiting and monetizing the hard work that they've done. And so acquisitions are a good thing, and acquisitions will continue to happen. And we need to make sure that we encourage how acquisitions are occurring. Now, the question is there going to be, an overly high degree of concentration of power as that happens? And that, by all means, there should be regulation to make sure that there's oversight to ensure that in no scenario is monopoly a good thing. Competition is a good thing, and the more competition there is, and the more competition there is, the more incentive there is for every company to go out and continue to keep innovating. And when there is more incentive to keep innovating, that actually the net benefactor of that is society at large. Mm-hmm. So it is extremely important that you don't have, that there is oversight, that you don't actually end up being into quasi-monopolies, and that the power of a monopoly should not be misused. It's not illegal to have a monopoly. It is illegal to use a monopoly in a way that can actually be disruptive for the market, and unfairly use the monopoly so that you crush the people who are coming in. So it is extremely important that that actually is being taken, kind of thought of pretty seriously from a regulatory standpoint. Mm-hmm. I do feel, though, that there is going to be more opportunity today than ever before of new companies and new ideas getting started and getting to a certain degree of de-risking. That there's more opportunity for large companies today than there ever was, and there's more opportunity for small companies today than ever was, because there's no shortage of appetite for innovative technology-based solutions to solve meaningful problems that you have. So I would say that regardless of whether you decide to go to a small company or large company, the one core principle you should internalize, especially in tech, but in every industry right now, is organic innovation is really important for any company that wants to succeed. You can't just buy your way out of it. You have to figure out a way that you can innovate organically. And as long as you're innovating organically, and as long as you're making sure that you're actually continuing to progress what you're delivering to the market in a meaningful enough way, you will actually be a net positive to society. If you start abusing the monopolistic powers that get accumulated by some of the large companies that are out there, and then they don't do anything, they continue to not innovate, I think that's when you actually start seeing things go sideways. But the beauty is the tech ecosystem is so vibrant that the moment, this is what I tell people, disruptions don't happen against incompetent companies. Disruptions happen against companies that are very competent, because their profit becomes your opportunity. And so,
right.
From a startup standpoint, you will always have this automatic check and balance when a big company starts to get lazy, is that the small company is going to come in and take that profit pool away from them. Mm-hmm. So, I think in tech, you don't have that kind of risk anymore of big companies saying, I'm just going to be kind of, I'll just be lazy and just kind of ride and cash cow the business. Like, it just doesn't happen, because the moment you do that, someone else comes in and takes away what you were building for years within a very small amount of time. The market share can shift.
Yep. Let me ask you one last question, then I'll do a wrap up here. Your advice for product managers looking to enter the tech industry from other industries, especially now in an era of COVID-19?
I would say probably 3 pieces of advice. First one is, understand that product management is probably one of the most leveraged positions in a company. And when I say leveraged, I mean that there's going to be the greatest ripple effect based on a decision that you make, where you won't have ownership or authority, but you will actually have a huge amount of consequence of ripple effect. So for example, what you decide as a product manager will impact an engineering team. What you decide as a product manager is going to impact a sales team, is going to impact a marketing team, is going to impact a customer success team, is going to impact the accounting and billing team, is going to impact your post-sales consulting team. All of those teams will get impacted by decisions that a product manager makes. So it's a very, very leveraged role. It's a leveraged role with a very high degree of influence, with a very low degree of ownership. So keep that in mind as you're going through it, that you shouldn't be power hungry being a product manager, thinking that you're going to have a lot of people working for you. That might be the case, but that's not the driving factor. What you should be thinking about is, I'm going to have a very high degree of responsibility for people that I have to influence and don't necessarily have ownership of. That's number one. Number two, in product management, the cardinal rule of what I believe is the most important thing to keep in mind from product management is the quality of the problem that you pick to solve is directly going to be proportionate to the outcome that you have of success. And what I mean by that is, the harder the problem, the higher the likelihood of success that you're going to have. And this is very counterintuitive, because most people might think, well, if I pick an easy problem to solve, that should be the highest probability of success. No, the harder the problem, what you'll see historically is those companies have actually done better. And the reason for that is, when you pick a high quality problem, you get the best talent. You attract the best talent to that problem. And software is typically a people game. Mm-hmm. And so pick the hardest problem to solve, and pick hard problems to solve that are consequential to society, and you will actually attract the best people. And when you attract the best people, you will have the most amount of impact, and you'll have the greatest probability of success. So that's my second kind of lesson that I would have for you. The third one is in product is, people get very good at learning the math of the business over their careers, and especially you're teaching an MBA class right now, right, Terry? This is an MBA class. So This is particularly valuable for you folks. People get very good about learning the math of the business. What they oftentimes forget is the soul of the business. Why is it that we are here in the first place? What problem are we here to solve that's going to be uniquely solved by us and no one else because of a perspective that we bring to the table? And will the world look different if you particularly don't solve this problem and your company doesn't solve this problem? You should not solve any problem if the answer to the third question is, the world wouldn't look that different, because then you shouldn't be solving that problem. If you can build a solution that is 10 times better than what someone else has already built, it's 10x better, then don't build it. because 20% improvement does not actually motivate someone to go out and switch solutions from one to the other. So make sure it's 10x better. Make sure that the quality of the problem's a high class problem that you're solving. And if you do that in the right way, you'll actually tend to find that, on the other end, you'll come out ahead. If you focus on just the math of the business without the soul of the business, you will find yourself to be slowly falling in the trap where someone else is going to come disrupt you. Because I'll leave you with this lesson. My biggest lesson I've learned in Silicon Valley: extremely smart people with exactly the right intent make very logical decisions that end up killing companies.
Interesting. A little alarming, but interesting.
Yeah.
Jeetu, let me do this. I always like to kind of share my takeaways whenever we get a luminary like you speaking. I want to share the 4 points I took away, and I want to give you as a final comment a chance to either upgrade what I said or share any other parting thoughts. First message I took away from you is this whole idea about never giving up. The importance of tenacity, of persistence, of matching that with intellect, the power of compounding. And by the way, these sound like these are messages for individuals, but they could also be messages for companies as well. But that's the first message that I took away. Second message is this idea about make sure you're always thinking about the mega trends, the big opportunities, et cetera. And whether it's the shift in real estate spending and travel spending, the 4 to 8%, and how that's going to create new opportunities, whether that was the advent of cloud computing and mobile, or whether it's thinking about the soul of a company and the soul of a problem, so that you're really kind of thinking about big opportunities. This is the second point that I took away. Third point I took away is about both the sobering nature of the environment that we're in today, and yet the power of leadership if executed well. The importance of leadership in thinking about having frank conversations, the importance of leadership in not being complicit, understanding that there are rights and wrongs and to have that moral compass, the importance of leadership in partnering with other organizations and governments and retraining and other things, but that the role of leadership can be a good force amidst terrible times. And then the final piece is your own personal story that things will get better. Make sure you keep that sense of who you are, the tenacity, have somebody nearby that can be your source of resilience, but to stay with it, because times that are difficult today aren't going to last forever, but you need to have the grit and the will to power through it. Those are the 4 takeaways I got. Any upgrades on that or parting comments?
You're pretty good at this, Terry. So I think the only thing I'd say that would be in addition to that is don't take a short position on yourself. Always bet long on yourself. So any single time that you have an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to make a bet on myself, take it every day of the week, twice on Sunday. It's the safest bet you can make, because you control every dimension of yourself, and you can choose to say, I'm going to bet on myself and I'm going to make sure that I make it come true. So.
Great advice. Jeetu, let me just say a huge thank you in wrapping up here. We have a variety of speakers that all are impressive, and we talk about technology and innovation, but I want to extend a special thank you because you shared a very personal story that is intrinsic to your own success. It's intrinsic to leadership, and it very much goes with commercial success and technology-based innovation. And I just want to thank you for your openness, your candor, your partnering, and want to congratulate you.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
I said one more thing on that. That's the reason I shared my story. I think it's important people understand it. Is I think it's important for people to know that each one of us has a story that seems insurmountable at some point in time. But it's okay if you're going through that phase right now, because you will get through it. I promise you will. But number two, once you get through it, share that story with others so that it inspires other people to say that they can get through it as well. Don't just keep it to yourself. Like there's, the more of your private self you can make public, the more human you will make it, and the more accessible you'll be, and the more you'll be able to inspire other people to go out and do great things. So if any one of you can take one thing away from this, is if I can make one life more inspired from this conversation, it is worth my time,
Yeah.
100%. So
what a great leadership message about the multiplier effect. Jeetu, a huge thank you. Congratulations on your new role at Cisco. Well done. And we will definitely look forward to having you come back very soon. Again, a huge thank you.
take care.
Take care. See ya.